find me. I'm here before class, usually after class, so not a big deal. Email's good too. I wanted to just kind of pick up where I left off last time. We didn't quite finish the 60s in the Vietnam War, but I just want to start with that. I think 1968 is a really tumultuous year in a lot of ways. You have Martin Luther King. Yes, sir. Lift the mic or turn it down? Oh, like there? Because it's like feeding back. How's that? That's better. Good. All right, so 1968 was a rough year for America. You had the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. No, I'm sorry, what am I thinking? Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And you also had this that happened right at the beginning of the year, the Tet Offensive. And the Tet Offensive, right in January of 1968, is basically a big battle, a series of battles in which the North Vietnamese military inflicts a whole bunch of damage upon America and American forces. Okay, now by 1967, America had like almost 500,000 troops in Vietnam, okay? 500,000 troops in Vietnam. And what the government was telling the people on television is that, hey, we're winning this war. They said, this is the quote, okay? There's light at the end of the tunnel, okay? It's there. We're almost there. We're gonna come out of the clearing now. And when the Tet Offensive happened, and it was widely broadcast on television, the air kind of got sucked out of America in a lot of ways, because the government was saying we were winning, and this showed something completely different. Now, we won pretty much every battle in the Tet Offensive, okay? And it was like, if I go back here, sorry, this is the map of the Tet Offensive, and basically it is like, you look at all those little red dots, and that's the destruction that was wrought upon South Vietnam, all the battles. So the United States basically won these battles, but it was seen as a complete loss, and the loss of confidence in America. And President Johnson seen here, remember we talked about President Johnson. Johnson was a big guy with a lot of confidence and a lot of bravado, right? Like threatening people to pass bills and stuff. Well, look at him now, right? Look at him. Just don't even think. Just look at him. Just look at him, okay? I'm just kidding. Just look at him. And he is just completely distraught, right? Because by now the war movement, anti-war movement, has totally picked up steam, and they're chanting this very famous phrase, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And just day after day of this on the news, the body counts on television telling how many dead Americans there were, and the protests, I mean, it just took its toll on him and pretty much ruined his presidency. I think if he wasn't in Vietnam, or he didn't take us into Vietnam, probably he would have lasted a whole nother term, and history would have been like super different. And his popularity completely dropped. It tanked out almost to Obama levels. 48%. No, I'm sorry. Obama isn't that bad. No, but seriously, 48% to 36%. Very few people were approving of the job he was doing, and really, unfortunately for him, that's the thing that sunk his ship is the Vietnam War. Besides all the great things that he did for the Great Society, right, and all the social programs, which we learned decreased poverty, right, in some way. Like, it didn't get rid of poverty, but it decreased it. So when Johnson's popularity is dropping, the morale begins to dip in Vietnam. And one reason morale is so bad is because this is kind of an ugly part about the Vietnam War, is that you have a disproportionate representation of poor people and minorities. African Americans, Chicanos, or Mexican Americans going off to fight. Poor white kids, kind of the blue collar kids, the students that aren't in the like nice universities. You know what I mean? Like the top-notch universities like UC Berkeley or Stanford or, USC, those kinds of places. Those kids get out of the war, and they're the ones protesting, okay, and burning their draft cards. And I think there's a big frustration level building up between the folks that have to go and have no choice versus the people that are behaving that way, burning the draft cards and chanting the LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And so there's like this resentment that's building up. And not only that, but there are racial problems in the military, carrying over from the 60s and the civil rights movement. You have the poor whites coming from a lot of the southern states that are fighting in Vietnam, and they're stuck with who they see as, people not as good as them, which are African Americans or Hispanic Americans. And so there's a lot of tension, a lot of fights breaking out in the military. And on top of that, the president is going to simply resign from office basically in March of that year. Like 2 months after the Tet Offensive, he basically says, I'm not going to seek another term. So you can imagine being a soldier, and it's basically like your president, who your commander-in-chief is basically giving up. And that really is like an nail in the coffin. You know what I mean? Like, if the president's getting out, it's like, what are we doing here? And I think a lot of soldiers in Vietnam felt that way. Drugs was a huge issue in Vietnam. When you look at marijuana usage, tobacco, whatever it might be, it made the soldiers less effective. The soldiers by then didn't want to be involved in the Vietnam War. They were just, I think, basically looking to do their time and get out. So this is a really toxic situation, and it's one that can't continue. Like I said, it's already bringing down one president. The next president, whoever that is going to have to deal with this big issue, the inevitable that the American people don't support the war. Americans don't want to be there. We've got tremendous problems. And, what's the solution? What's the solution to that? So, and this is the very famous announcement that President Johnson makes. He says, I shall not seek and I'll not accept the nomination of my party. And that's him. That's actually the television broadcast. And that was a very famous broadcast and a very somber broadcast, too, on television. That's, as far as I know, that's the only president to ever do that. And to just say, like, because I'm losing a war, I'm resigning. Now, the president after him, Nixon, is going to resign for another reason. That's because of Monica Lewinsky. No, that's different. Never mind. Okay, so just kidding. Yeah, so like this is, again, unprecedented in American history, a war bringing a president down. And, further than that, the American military did some really awful stuff in Vietnam. And, there's blood on both sides. But one of the most famous ones is the My Lai massacre in 1968, in which the United States Army just pretty much goes into an unarmed village, the village of My Lai. And estimates say it's between 200 and 500. We'll probably never know the exact reason, but American soldiers often had a tough time figuring out who the enemies were in Vietnam, which made it a difficult war to fight. You couldn't tell the difference between a civilian and a communist Viet Cong member. Viet Cong being the southern wing of the North Vietnamese communists. Couldn't tell. And so what they do, they had to often resort to mass killings, and this is our military that's doing this, and we usually think this is reserved for the Nazis and stuff, but America's done this. This isn't the first time America's done this too. We did this in the Spanish-American War too. Mass graves, thousands of people killed. So our government has not always done things cleanly in war. It's very famous, and if I had it, I would show you. But it's a famous picture, not a picture, but a newscast of, I think CBS did it. They were interviewing this American soldier. It's like, what are you doing here? If the American soldier was basically like rounding up all of the people in the village and basically threatening them and saying, like, look, if you don't tell us who's communist here, we're going to burn down your village. And so, of course, people don't understand the language. They're like, what? What do you say? There's no identification. And so this guy actually literally sets fire with a cigarette lighter on a whole village, no joke. And that's broadcast on the nightly news. And you know, if you're an American citizen watching that, you're going, oh my God, really? This is what we're doing in Vietnam? So this is just one of those instances. Now, this became big news back then, of course. You know, what is our military doing? What is Lieutenant William Calley doing? Who's the platoon leader? So lots of problems in Vietnam. Anti-war demonstrations heating up. Here's one at Columbia University in New York. Again, what went wrong in Vietnam? There's a lot of things. The first thing is probably that there was television coverage of the war. I think it would have been worse with Twitter and Facebook. Oh my God, hashtag drug use, you know. You know what I mean? It's the television, the live television, the constant barrage of media, the body counts, when Americans are getting these things beamed into their rooms at home, I think just really makes people sour on the war. You know, one time back in college, I had to do this project once. I had to interview people about the Vietnam War, and every single person, I don't care if they were Democrat or Republican, they said, the government just lied to us, just straight up. We had absolutely no idea what was really going on. And the television camera showed a different story. And of course, these are all just pictures of some of the Vietnam anti-war protests that were going on in the 60s. Which brings us to the late 60s, and we have chapter 30, which is the old book. I'm sorry, chapter 30, which is the new book, and chapter 32, which is the old book. It's called The Crisis of Authority. And America is at a really critical juncture in its history, okay? What's going to happen, you know, because in the 60s, we've had some good things happen, and we've had some very, very bad things happen. And so to kind of recap that, the liberals, Kennedy and Johnson, have given us some good things in some ways, depending on if you're a Republican, they're probably not good things. But, you know, you think about all the social programs, the Great Society programs, the Medicare, the Medicaid, the expansion of government to help the poor, the war on poverty. That's generally been good, okay? The civil rights movement has generally been good, although it got violent a little more at the end. But it has yielded some changes, right? You know, voting rights, civil rights. The Vietnam War has basically divided the country. And what it's done is, to the Democrats that started out with so much promise, if we go back here, with so much promise for the liberals and the Democrats being able to, you know, try to do their job and to promote a lot more policies that they want to have America, you know, do better with. The Vietnam War comes around and basically is like a big wrecking ball, wrecks the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party slips. Just splits. You got anti-war Democrats, pro-war Democrats. There's a convention in 1968 in Chicago, which is the place where they're going to elect the next representative to see who's going to be president. And it's just a big mess. There's protests in the streets. There's police bashing protesters. There's ex-veterans. It's just a big mess. And so the Republicans now have the in, and they're going to try to win the election. And this is going to be a really interesting election, okay? And they nominate Richard Milhous Nixon. Well, got to do that. Exactly. Richard Nixon, a very fascinating guy, former vice president during the